Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our network learning session today. We are going to give it just a few more minutes to make sure we get folks on the call. So hang tight, and we'll get started in just a moment. Thanks for joining us. All right, let's get started. So thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Heather McGinnis. I use she, her pronouns, and I am our program manager for policy here at North Sound ACH. And today, our Collaborative Action Network learning session is getting started with legislative advocacy. And this is part one of a advocacy learning session. We'll have some future sessions coming soon on different topics around advocacy. Stay tuned at the end, we'll share the next date, but we are so happy for you to be here today with us. And we've got a great group of folks who are going to share their knowledge and experience with us. So thanks for being here. So before we jump into today's session, we will do our land acknowledgement to acknowledge the land where we are today. So we begin by acknowledging with humility the land where we are today is the territory of the people of the Salish Sea. Their presence is imbued in the waterways, shorelines, valleys, and mountains of the traditional homelands of the Coast Salish people since time immemorial. Thank you. All right, so we are going to be using the chat throughout. So let's get started by introducing ourselves today since we have a large group. So if you want to drop in the chat your name, pronouns, the organization that you are from today, and your role or title, and we can get that going. So go ahead and get that started. And then if you also want to mention as an icebreaker question in the chat, what does advocacy mean to you in 3 words or less? So as folks are doing that, I will go over a little bit of what we can expect for our time today. So today we are going to do some framing around why advocacy is important and kick off our advocacy learning series. We will have a grounding presentation on Legislative Advocacy 101 from Tiffany Brace at the Nonprofit Association of Washington. We will have a panel discussion with several of our wonderful partners at organizations across the network who will share with us what advocacy looks like in action at their organizations. We'll have some time for some small group, some breakouts to talk and share reflections on the presentation, talk about what you're doing in your organization, and then we'll come back together for some sharing and we'll close out and talk about next steps. So that's our time together today. This session will go until 12 noon, so we have 2 hours. We don't have any scheduled breaks, so please take care of yourselves when you need to. Feel free to turn off your video, go take a bio break if you need to. So make sure you're taking care of yourself throughout. And also just a couple other reminders. We are currently in the month of Ramadan. So to respect those observing Ramadan and fasting during the day, we ask that you please refrain from eating or drinking on camera during this time. So thank you for that. And as I said, use the chat throughout. We also have a Q&A feature at the bottom bar in your Zoom. So you can click on that and ask questions directly to the presentation team. So feel free to use that or utilize the chat to ask questions. And also, if you want to use the chat to share resources or information that you know that's relevant to today's topic that you think others would like to know, that would be fantastic too. So, also in the chat, our presentation team will be putting a few things in, and they'll share things with a little tulip emoji so you can find it easily. Links and prompts, questions for discussion, things like that. So, and finally, today's meeting is being recorded, as you can see. So we will be sharing out the recording along with slides and any resources that are shared after today's meeting. And so look out for an email with that. All right, and with that, feel free, keep dropping in the chat your intros and your icebreaker question responses. But we will go to the next slide and we will talk about why we're here today. So many of you remember this document here. It is our collaborative action network commitments and how we create change. And so a big part of how we create change, as you can see, is advocacy. And so that's what we're really going to hone in on today. And as we start off this learning series, so just wanted to highlight what we've put forward as what advocacy means and how we can create change together as a network. Advocacy transforming the current state through fresh collaborative approaches and voices, influence local and regional policies and organizational practices, use our voice and power to influence state policy and investments, which is a lot of what we'll be talking about today, and leverage knowledge to address the region's current and emerging complexities that cross clinical and social issues, including those that will advance equity and address privilege and structural racism. And if you go to the next slide. So just to hone in on that a little bit more, why are we talking about advocacy today? So we have heard from so many of you in your reporting and meetings and conversations that there are many policy barriers that are getting in the way of communities thriving, that we can only do so much within our organizations or in collaborative projects, but at a certain point we need to do some work upstream to address those policy barriers. So what's our why? Individually and as a network, we have power to create significant policy change. So let's amplify the voices of the communities that we serve and leverage our collective power to make change. And finally, advocacy can happen in many different ways. It can have a really broad definition of advocacy. Today, we'll focus on state legislative advocacy. We'll also be thinking about advocacy primarily with a nonprofit organization lens today, since many of you represent nonprofits. However, of course, there are those of you who are not a nonprofit organization, so we will have some additional resources to share later if that is what applies to you. And then goals for today's session. As I mentioned, this is part one of a series. Today, our goals are to build network members' capacity to engage in advocacy work, to provide an overview of how your organization can engage in legislative advocacy, learn from our peers about what legislative advocacy can look like, and discuss what action steps we want to take as individual organizations and as a network. And you can go to the next slide. All right. So with that, I would love to introduce Tiffany Brace, who is the Policy Director at the Nonprofit Association of Washington. And we are so happy to have Tiffany here today to give us some information about legislative advocacy and Legislature 101. And I had the privilege of hearing Tiffany speak at our friends at North Central ACH's partner convening a while ago, and it just seemed like it would be a really helpful presentation to share with you all. So with that, thank you, Tiffany, and I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really excited to be here with you all. Like Heather said, I'm Tiffany, Policy Director at the Nonprofit Association of Washington. So I'm going to share a little bit about the work that we do. We're going to play some interactive legislative trivia. We're going to learn a little bit about what nonprofits can and can't do when it comes to advocacy and lobbying. And really what I'm hoping to leave you with is a little bit more information and some more confidence to be active, to be more active, or to know how to kind of start in being more active in legislative policy. Yeah, so I'm from the Nonprofit Association of Washington. We call ourselves NAWA. We've only been around for about 13 years, and we are a membership association for all nonprofits. So we do have some members that pay in, but we also work on behalf of all nonprofits in Washington, and we really exist to strengthen nonprofits so that you all can strengthen Washington communities. And we do three main things. We have a learning team that puts on some really amazing learning programs, including some basics around nonprofits. We also have a lot of opportunities for collaboration and for getting with other nonprofits that do similar work or a similar size or in a similar region. And then our third big thing is advocacy, which I do. So we do, so these are some of the goals for our policy program. And really the policy and advocacy work that we do, we focus on issues that affect the nonprofit sector broadly. So I have an example in here later about improving nonprofit and government contracts. So that's something that we're working on. And then kind of the other piece of my role is to help you all be better or be more effective and more knowledgeable about advocacy and working on your missions and the policy that makes your missions and visions possible. So that's part of what I'm doing here and what I get excited about, which is doing a little bit of education. So we're going to switch gears a little bit. We're going to use a application called Mentimeter. If you haven't used it before, it's interactive. So if you can have another screen, I really like using my phone to log on, because then you'll want to be able to see the screen that I'm sharing right now, as well as the second screen. So I like doing it on my phone, but you can also do it into Windows side by side, or if you have, multiple screens like some of us do, you could do that as well. So you can go to menti.com and then you can enter this code, which is 7592737, or you can use the QR code on your phone's camera to get there. And once you get there, you won't see very much yet because I haven't started the trivia. But yeah, it looks like some folks are finding the cute little buttons. So that means you're on the right page. I'm just going to pause for a moment and see if anybody wants any assistance in getting set up. Okay. I'm not seeing anything, but if you have any questions throughout, feel free to jump in and let me know, because I think it's fun. So I want you all to participate. So we're going to do, so it's going to be trivia. There are going to be 5 questions. The faster you answer, the more points you get, but only if you get it right. So yay, this is great. Okay. So we've got 59 players, 60. Okay. You're still coming in. We'll wait a second. Great. And I love all the random like emoji things that we all have. Okay, great. Skipping around a little bit. Okay, we're going to get started here. So I'll read the question and then there'll be answers and you can, you can choose from them. You'll see how it works. Okay. So our first question, about how many bills are introduced in Olympia each year? So is that 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, or 4,000 bills? And if you just scroll down on your phone, you can see the different options. Great. It looks like a bunch of you have already voted. Okay, cool. You're getting it. Awesome. I love this. Okay. I love when I can teach you all something new. Okay. Somebody got it. Was that? I saw some excitement. Yeah. Only 4 of you got it. Yeah. So there are about 4,000 bills that are introduced each session. Which is just kind of to show you like how much is happening during session, how many bills are being considered. And so from those 4,000, right, only a few of them only a portion of them are moving through the process, right? And so there are only a few hundred that actually get a vote on the floor and then are signed by the governor and get made into law. So you can just kind of, I get a little like flustered this time, well, the beginning of session, because of just all the things that are coming through and trying to track all of those. Okay. This is a good one. Okay, so we've got 4 people pulling out front right away. Looks like Greta answered the fastest. Very exciting. Okay. So our next question. How long is the 2023 legislative session? 65 days, 85 days, 105, or 135? Cool, more of you knew that one. Yeah, so it's 105 days this year, and that's because this is the longer of our sessions. So yeah, some folks don't know, but our legislators are in Olympia for only a portion of the year. We have a citizen legislature, which just means that they have other jobs, and go back to their jobs in their communities for the rest of the year. So we had in 2023, we're working on the budget this year. So we have a longer legislative session. Next year, our legislators will only be there for 60 days. So not a lot of time. Yeah. Sorry, I just clicked out of the wrong thing. Apologies. Okay. All right, Greta, holding down the lead. Somebody's got to kick Greta off the top. Okay. I get kind of competitive, so it's just. Okay, great. Looks like most of you are still here. Awesome. So what advocacy actions can charitable nonprofits take? Can y'all do legislative lobbying, like educating lawmakers about policy, issue campaigning, like working for or against an initiative? Can you educate and inform, like for voter engagement and getting out the vote efforts? Or can you do all of those things? Everyone has voted, yay. Oops, sorry, go back. Yeah, so all of the above, exactly. Yeah, so nonprofits' right to advocate is protected by law. And like we were just talking about, or Heather was just talking about, advocacy really helps us achieve our missions. And you all and your staff and your communities you work with have invaluable information to share with our lawmakers. They are not interacting with the community as much as you are, and they need to know what you know and have that information. There are some rules, lobbying limits, reporting requirements, but they're actually pretty straightforward. And we're going to talk about them a little bit. We're going to talk about them a little bit later, but just know that there are so many things that nonprofits can do, and that your voices are really needed. Okay, where are we at here? Greta's still on top. Wow, okay. Okay. This one's a little silly. A bill was introduced to establish Washington's official dinosaur. What dinosaur is it? And if you know your dinosaurs, the photo that I've added here is a photo of a drawing of the actual dinosaur. Great. So the majority of folks knew that one too. Yeah, I like that. I mean, our state government does a lot, right? There's all kinds of bills and they're on such a variety of topics. One of the things I like about this is that it was introduced by a class of 4th graders back in 2020, and it's it keeps being reintroduced, and it's actually quite controversial, which I think is a little bit hilarious, but gives a little bit of insight into some of the kind of personal politics that go on in the legislature. But anyone can, have an idea for a bill and take it to their lawmakers and ask them to sponsor it. Ooh, Puffy. Okay, Puffy and Greta very close together. See what happens here. This is our last question. Which legislative district is Bellingham in? Looks like most folks have voted. Okay, let's see what happened here. Oh, so close. Puffy takes the win. Greta, honorable mention, right behind. And before you close your second screen, I just have one more thing here, just to get a sense of where everyone's at, and maybe where we should spend some more time. These are just little, you're going to pull it over kind of on a scale. So how comfortable are you contacting your legislators? Do you believe your voice is important to the lawmaking process? And do you think that you can impact policy? Great. Yeah. So some really confident folks right off the bat, but I think as a group, maybe somewhere in the middle. Slightly agree, maybe. Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you all so much for doing that with me. Let's pop back over to our presentation here. I think the thing I really want you all to know, it can be helpful to have some of this context, right? Like how long are legislators in Olympia, or kind of like what are they dealing with? But I want you all to know that you already have everything everything you need to know in order to advocate. You don't have to know how it all works, or be able to say all the steps of a bill making it through the process. You all really know a lot about your communities, and your job is to tell your legislators what's important to you and your community, and their job is really to figure it out. They work for you all. So right now they're still going to be in the legislature until late April. So they're still working on some stuff, working hard. And if there's anything in there anything that's still alive that you all care about, it's always a good time to reach out to your legislators. Yeah, so kind of advocacy generally, I loved seeing all of your how you describe advocacy in 3 words. I think that those were super great and helpful. And I think kind of like the folks who do, similar work to the work that we do, kind of, I think instinctually understand advocacy, but maybe don't always apply that to our legislature, or kind of, full on kind of politics, right? We're really good at advocating for our communities and maybe the folks we work with. Yeah, so it doesn't have to be, kind of like these big things. There's so many decision makers that you can influence in so many ways to do it. And we talked a little bit about this, but we advocate to support our missions, right? I'm a social worker. That's my background. I'm a social worker, and I spent a lot of years working in direct service. And it would just it would break my heart and frustrate me when I kept having families come to me over and over again with the same issues, right? Our system is broken. And without kind of doing that upstream work, right, we're never going to actually get to the full vision that we want to get to. So that's why I do this work. Yeah, so I think if you think about your work, I think there are probably things that can't be fixed kind of from your work alone, right? We need to work collectively, and we need to work for systemic change. And then, there are a bunch of different ways that we can kind of influence things. So money is a big one. The budget is being debated right now. So, where does money go? Who gets it? What are the rules associated with it? That's huge. We can advocate on specific policies, right? What we want to see. A lot of times, a lot of policies, in my experience, folks don't think about how they'll impact nonprofits. And so that's a lot of what we try to bring to the legislature. And something that folks sometimes forget about it is the implementation. So sometimes we pass a law and we're so excited, and it's going to be great. And then maybe the state agency that gets it thinks about it completely differently. And maybe, if it was a great program, makes it really kind of inaccessible for folks. There's kind of a lot of advocacy that can be done that way. And then we can do advocacy, like who we're trying to impact can be different. So if we're working with our community, or I think when we think of it, a lot of times we're thinking of our electeds and how to influence them. But we can also influence public opinion and be telling different stories in the media. Yeah. And I want you all to know, like, there's so many things that are advocacy and so many things that nonprofits can do. So I think we often think of like lobbying, maybe lobby days, or calling or emailing your legislator, which is really important. But there's also kind of so many other pieces to it. I'd kind of love to be able to just send an email every once in a while on an issue and have my lawmakers listen, but without kind of doing the relationship building and the educating on the issues, and they don't know who I am and they don't care. So I think, just like there's so many things that we can do. Great. Mm-hmm. And the specific thing that we have to be a little bit careful about is lobbying. So nonprofits can absolutely lobby. And I think often, like when I think of just lobbying or lobbyists generally, I often think of like this pharmaceutical rep in like, who's really well paid and is like taking legislators out to dinner. But I'm also a registered lobbyist, and a bunch of folks in nonprofits are registered lobbyists. Lobbying is not a bad thing, right? It's the act of contacting a decision maker and asking them to vote a certain way, or to have a certain take on an issue. So we can do that. And I think as nonprofits, we don't often get compensated in the same way that for-profits do to lobby. And I think that makes it even more important that we kind of all know how to do it and are all out there. So just for y'all's kind of information, we have two systems that kind of govern our ability to lobby as a nonprofit. So on the federal level, the definition of lobbying is pretty succinct. It's decision maker, and you're talking about actual legislation. So like you have a bill number and you're asking for a vote. And at the federal level, basically all they want to know is that you're doing your main work most of the time. If you're, typically, if it's not a substantial part of what your organization is doing, that's chill. And they're really looking at, are you still a nonprofit? Should you have the nonprofit tax exemption? And that's basically that you're not just an advocacy organization, because then you wouldn't be a 501c3. But I think all of the nonprofits that I've talked with, I've never met anyone who was even close to their close to their maximum. I think our fear of what we're allowed to do and not allowed to do keeps us way, way below our actual maximums. And then on the state level, they don't care what you're doing. They just want to know that you're doing it. So on the state level, it's really about disclosure. And the definition of lobbying is a little bit broader. It's attempting to influence a decision maker on any subject or legislation. So if you're doing some, you know, I do it when we do like kind of education, kind of on like specific subjects or specific topics. I count that. And they're really just concerned with state government. So you can report this. I'm a registered lobbyist and do monthly reporting on the PDC. It is not that scary. And yeah, so the threshold of lobbying activity, so it's 4 or more days during a 3-month period. So you can do unlimited lobbying. Just if you're over that threshold, they want you to register and report it. So just to like make that super clear, there are 2 different rules. The IRS is like, are you still a nonprofit? Are y'all still doing that kind of work? And the PDC is saying, please let us know how you're trying to influence public policy. Yeah, so there are a few things you cannot do as a 501c3, and it's really about partisan activity and candidates. So your organization is not a political machine, it's a charitable nonprofit, and your tax status means that you can't be involved in partisan activity. But there are a lot of things. So you don't want to use your resources for partisan activity, but you can kind of participate or throw, town halls or community listening sessions, even with candidates and during election time, as long as you invite and give all candidates equal time. And then it's much easier when they're not, when they're just your elected officials and they're not campaigning, because there are fewer rules then. And then as an individual, we just kind of need to know which hat we're wearing. So we can do all these things as an individual. And I would, suggest that you do get involved in your local politics and know who's running and support different folks. I really like to go to, a lot of legislators and local politicians now do fundraising events that have a much smaller kind of buy-in. They're more like community events. And so I'll go to those as an individual to kind of build that relationship. But it's really important that I don't use our organization credit card or time that I'm being paid from the organization to do those things. And then I would just caution a little bit in the executive directors we have on the call. Sometimes your identity gets a little conflated with the organization's identity. And so just being super clear about that is really helpful. So bringing this back up, we can do all of these things, and lobbying is the only place where we have to think about it a little bit and report. So, the intention here really is to give you more confidence, right? There's so many things that nonprofits can do, including lobbying. And so, I want folks to feel confident and feel like they can kind of be out there and be in it, and letting their legislators know what they think and building those relationships. And I just want to pull this back because I don't know that very many people, I think a lot of people tell me that they don't know this. So small amounts of lobbying, like sending a single email, count toward one of your 4 days. So you get 4 days in 3 months. And a lot of folks, you'll get, start getting action alerts and things during legislative session. And if you send those on 4 different days, you would need to start you need to register and start reporting. And it's a monthly report. Those 4 days are organization wide. So, so if you are sending an email and a coworker sending an email the next day, and then another coworker sending an email the next day, once you get to 4, someone needs to register. You don't all have to do it. I do it kind of mostly for my organization. And so all the different things that we do, I put it all in my report. Yeah, and just to, yeah, if you're paid for that time, like it's part of the work that you do as the organization. It also counts if you have volunteers that are reimbursed for their expenses. Say if they were traveling to Olympia to speak with legislators. And just real quick, so it's not too scary. This is part of my report last month, and you can see that once you're registered, you have to put everything on there that you interact with, all of the issues. And so these are some of them, and some of the ones that I weighed in on as the policy director and the Nonprofit Association of Washington, and some of the ones that I weighed in on as a human community member, Washingtonian. Yeah, mostly human services stuff, which I'm passionate about. Yeah, I wonder if folks have any kind of questions about that. There are a lot of resources that we'll be sending out. And Boulder Advocacy, who's a great resource, just came out with a Washington specific set of practical guidance. And I kind of love the way that that's laid out. It's much more accessible than the PDC website. Great. Awesome. Yeah, so I think we've talked about it a little bit, but everybody gets really excited during session. We're during session, advocacy alerts are going out, and there are lobby days, and you're kind of, there's lots of buzz. But I want to give you a little bit of an analogy here. So during session is like all of our legislators are playing a big game, and they're all on the clock, right? It's game time. Session is game time. And if you're a coach, yeah, you may need to do some screaming during a game, or quick huddle with a star player to kind of figure that out. But it's not the time to be doing drills or educating them on the basics of basketball. And the same is really true with the legislature. So if there's something important that pops up and you want to urge your legislator to act on it, that's great. Give them a call, visit, email them. But if you want to kind of build a relationship and educate them so they're prepared to kind of strategically play with your issues, then you really need to be doing that outside of the game. So there's a lot of, we're getting to almost to the end of session, but there's a lot of opportunities to be doing advocacy work outside of session. Yeah, and just an example. So we had a very successful legislative reception in Olympia last month. We brought together 80 nonprofit leaders, met with 42 legislators, and Governor Inslee came to speak and spoke to one of our main issues that we're pushing. But we didn't just invite him to come and he showed up, right? Months ago, I started building a relationship with Governor Inslee's chief of staff. And we had a few meetings where we talked about our issues. And when we asked and we followed up with the chief of staff, she told Governor Inslee that he should go to this event, and briefed him so that he could speak to our issue, which is government and nonprofit contracting reform. So there's a lot of work to set that up, and kind of the foundation that's needed outside of session to do some of those things. And here's kind of just a timeline of different things that you can do. So the red here, this is session this year. Again, next year will be much smaller. And the majority of months we're not in session. And so kind of what else can you do? It's a great time to connect with your legislators. When you go to see them in session, right, they're in game. So they'll usually give you about 15 minutes. If you pull them off the floor, active game time, you'll usually get 3 to 5 minutes. But if you meet with them outside of the legislative session, they can usually spend more time with you. You can work a little bit more on strategy. There's time to develop ideas, and you can get legislative updates from them. Set up meetings. One of my favorite things that I think is really meaningful is inviting legislators to tour your nonprofit, to meet your employees, to learn a little bit about what you're facing. When legislators are, when there's a bill about food banks or, how, or about hunger in our state, and a legislator knows their local food bank, right? Like they can call them immediately and kind of ask, what's the implication of this? Like, what am I not thinking about, right? Because they know they don't have that expertise. But when they get connected to you, that's a really great way to be involved and share some of the expertise that you have. And this is also the time that organizations work on developing their legislative agenda, making a plan for session, getting folks involved, connecting with other folks who feel similarly passionate about issues, things like that. Yeah, and for me, I think some of these issues, right, can feel really daunting. We're talking about kind of systems that have been made over years and years, and trying to undo a lot of things. But I think, I've seen there's a lot of power in people and community. So yeah, I imagine some folks have seen this before, but it's just the idea that, when we're all working individually, we're just kind of scraping by, we're trying to survive, we're just doing the work. But when we come together, when we're organized in collective action, we can really impact change. And, of course, we're capable of doing so much more. So some of these are some of my favorite coalitions that you can work with, including the North Sound ACH, right? This is a great vehicle for doing some of this work and having more capacity, right? Like I know most organizations, if they're smaller, medium organizations, probably don't even have a full-time advocacy person. If they're larger, maybe have one full-time person working on this stuff. So it makes a lot of sense that you wouldn't have kind of a full-scale advocacy program within your organization. But when you join with other folks, they're doing a lot of the legwork and the research, and you can kind of show up when needed. So that's always a great place to start. And then I just want to leave you with this quote, which I absolutely love, which is arguably the most important public policies we have in the United States have come from nonprofit organizations lobbying for their causes. These achievements may be largely attributed to the strong leadership of executive directors and board members who knew that direct service alone would not change the flawed or missing public policies that contributed to the problems their organizations were trying to alleviate. So I hope what you take from this is that you hold a lot of power, and we need all of you to be engaged in the lawmaking process. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from some of our colleagues about what advocacy has looked like in their work. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tiffany. That was great. We do have a little bit of time for some questions, and I know that there are a couple of questions in the chat. Real quick, not to be annoying, but Bellingham is actually in 2 legislative districts. It's split between the 40th and 42nd. It's a very funny thing. We're split halfway downtown. Yeah.
Should have zoomed in a little more on the map. Yeah.
It's okay.
No,
I know.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
It's a funny thing. Yeah. Makes for interesting politics. So let's see, Elizabeth, are you able to raise those questions that Mario put in the chat?
Sure. And Mario, feel free to jump in as well. I think, Mario, your first question was around if you sign a letter for another organization, does that count as one of your 4 lobbying days?
If that letter is going to a legislator, yes. And going to a lawmaker or decision maker on something that they have the power to make a decision on. I hope that's clear. Yeah, so all of those kind of action alerts, tell the Senate, your legislator on Senate Ways and Means that you want them to vote this out of committee, tell the speaker that we want to vote on this bill, all of those things count. Yeah. Do we want to go to Devin, or was there another? Let's go to Devin.
Oh, you're muted, Devin.
Okay, sorry about that. I just want to clear up, thank you for taking my question. I want to clear up something that I learned at Leg Day this year that's confusing to me. And it was that if you are meeting with your legislator on behalf of an organization, my understanding was, nonprofit or not, you could only advocate. But that if you were not being paid and that if you were not representing an organization, just there yourself or having a meeting yourself, then you could lobby. And I mean, I'm connected to multiple organizations, but some of the things that come up are personally important. And so I'm not showing up representing, you know, Peace Health or Western Washington University or Planned Parenthood. Just, this is important to me. What does that fall under, and like, what are the rules, if that makes sense? Thank you.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about kind of advocacy versus lobbying, what is the difference in is lobbying more like you're asking them, please vote yes on House Bill 1548? Is that kind of what you're thinking of?
Yes.
Yeah, you can absolutely do that as a nonprofit. Yeah, you can do that as a representative of a nonprofit if you're getting paid by a nonprofit, or your expenses are being reimbursed, like as a board member or something like that. Yeah, you're welcome to do that. Yeah, I think as part of a nonprofit, right, you do want to, like, so some of the things I signed in on my own, because NAWA doesn't take a stand usually on all of like the social and human services stuff, because that's just not where our not where our focus is. And so I sign in on those individually. So you do want, I think, just as like a standard practice or a best practice, you want to have your organizations, whether it's through your board or some amount of staff, come together and say, we do want this bill, or we do approve of this, or we want to, like, basically you're taking a public stand as an organization. So that's not something you really want to do on your own. But as far as like the legality of it and doing it as a 501c3, you're absolutely allowed to take a public stand and lobby.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. We do need to move along to make sure we have enough time for our panel. But if you have more questions or things that come up as we're going through our session today, feel free to put them in the chat or use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And we will be sharing a link to our resource library where we have a collection on advocacy specifically. And I think that will be dropped in the chat, and any links or resources that come up today that aren't in there, we will add those. So check that out if you want to dive into some of the resources that are out there, because there are some really amazing things, but you can definitely take a lot of time to really get in the weeds with them. So make sure you do that after this session. So thank you so much to Tiffany for laying the groundwork for us. So now we'd like to hear from some of our network members, our partners who are doing this work, advocacy in action. And so we always think it's really helpful to hear from our colleagues, just to kind of bring it to life a little bit and think about what it can look like, and also hear what your experiences have been and what you've learned while you're doing this work, and kind of where you want to go. So I would like to introduce our panelists, and we are so appreciative that they could take the time to be with us today. So first we have Elizabeth Jennings from Community Action of Skagit County. We have Kati Ortiz, who is a board member at Community Action of Skagit County and is also an educator at Skagit Valley College. We have Barbara Schultheiss from Lopez Island Family Resource Center. We have Michelle Frye from Homage Senior Services. And we have Julie Rose, also from Homage Senior Services. So thank you to all of you. All right, so to kick us off for the panel, I'm going to invite each of you to share a little bit about what advocacy looks like at your organization, how you engage staff, board members, the communities that you serve, and share a little bit about what you've learned, what's worked and what hasn't worked. So I think we will start with Elizabeth and Kati, and we will see some slides from them. So thank you.
Thanks, Heather, and thank you, Tiffany, for that great introduction and overview. So much good stuff I learned in that. I'm Liz Jennings from Community Action in Skagit County, and I've been doing advocacy starting as a volunteer in the 1990s with Amnesty International, and have taken that, what I've learned, and applied it at the local, state, and federal level. And I just wanted to start with the big picture. When I joined Community Action of Skagit County in 2012, we were doing advocacy, but we didn't have a strategy. So I just want to show you, since we've developed a strategy over the last 10 years, what it looks like. So we don't look at advocacy as an individual activity. We see it as a part of a continuum in our entire community engagement strategy. And this is important because in smaller nonprofits and bigger nonprofits, different people have different roles, but they're doing it for the same reason. All of our community engagement strategies, the purpose is to build long-term relationships to achieve our mission. So that comes with community education, communications, that learning strategy. How are we engaging the community to know what we do and who we serve? We also engage folks as volunteers. There's people who want to make a difference right now and change a life. Well, public policy advocacy is for those folks who say, hey, I'm a problem solver. I want long-term solutions. We also engage folks in giving money, foundations, giving stuff in kind donations. And we also do a lot of work around coordinating with local, state, and federal coalitions or community initiatives. All of these external relationships may involve the people we serve. We listen to them, we get them involved as leaders, we put them on the bus to Olympia, and we really take the lead from the people we serve. But I just wanted to show that, especially if we're making the case, if we have to make the case to our organizations to engage advocacy, we want to put it in the context of how it helps all of these relationships. Next slide, Heather. So at Community Action of Skagit County, we did do state legislative advocacy ad hoc for many years. And then we started with constituent engagement by getting about 40 people on a bus to Olympia. And this would have been our 10th year of doing it. We've been doing it virtually for this. This is the third time we've been doing it virtually. And why do we do this? It's for the mission. So again, when making the case for advocacy in our organizations, bring it back, because at Community Action of Skagit County, we're charged, like every community action agency in the state, not only to serve folks, but to change attitudes and practices towards people experiencing poverty. We have to change the systems, we have to change the community. Next slide. So advocacy is kind of baked into what we do. A third of our board are people with lived experience in homelessness, hunger, other issues related to poverty. And then we started with that bus trip and started to build out that calendar that Tiffany showed is awesome. We didn't have that calendar, but we started doing that stuff, having tours, engaging electeds in different ways throughout the year. Participating in statewide coalitions, and showing up in Olympia once a year and writing letters and emails for our coalition partners. And then more recently with Zoom, actually participating in hearings more often on our own. And then our board did create an advocacy subcommittee focusing on the relationships, community relationships, education, and advocacy task force. And we actively engage our Latinx advisory committee, which does public policy listening sessions, candidate education, and more. So I'll stop there and respond to some of the other questions and turn it over to one of our rock star board members, Kati Ortiz, who has lots of advocacy experience in and out of community action.
Thank you, Liz. And if you can go back 2 slides and I'll reference to this a little bit. So hi, everyone. Like the introduction said, my name is Kati Ortiz and I work at Skagit Valley College with the Maestros para el Pueblo program, where we support students who are bilingual and becoming educators in our community. And I'm here today as a board member with Community Action of Skagit County. A little bit about myself. I'm a Latina. I'm a first-generation college graduate. And I think, my connection with community action really started as a child. So as a child, I had two very hardworking parents. Yet there were the days when I would get up to go to school in the morning, and I'd run to the bathroom and then the light switch wouldn't turn on, which meant maybe the light bill didn't get paid this month. And then I would go to take a shower, and sometimes I would look out, there would still be a little bit of hot water in that tank, and other days it was like I need to be in and out of this shower. So I share that with you all because part of doing lobbying and advocacy is bringing yourself and bringing your experiences and really sharing and building that relationship with others. So how I engage in advocacy is always about learning together. It's sharing my own experience and my community's experience. I often think about the impact and where it's going to be important and urgent that my voice be heard. For me, I consider how a specific issue could impact or has impacted me and my community, and I think about the difference that needs to be made. A lot of the advocacy, like I mentioned, that I do is sharing my story with local leaders and also with decision makers in public offices such as health and education settings. Sometimes it also includes sending that email or responding to an alert, and other times it's in leading legislative meetings. One of the other groups that I'm a part of is also Latino Civic Alliance, and I help lead legislative meetings for my district. And a big part of advocacy that I also do is trying to get other people engaged as well, so that they can share their own experience and their own story as well. And if you can go to, not the next slide, but the slide after that. Thank you. And here I wanted to share a little bit about what it looks like from my perspective as a board member with Community Action. So we have our normal board meetings where we engage in like topics that are important to us, such as housing. And then we have the other committees, and one of the committees that I'm a part of is the Latinx Advisory Committee that Liz mentioned, and the other is the Create Committee. So with the Create Committee, we do that relationship building when it's not during session time, and we really engage in those conversations so that our representatives are willing to, hear us out when we have something really pressing. And then with the Latinx Advisory Committee, we hold listening sessions with the community members with lived experiences. And we also have hosted candidate forums with elected officials and with other public administrators. What's really wonderful, I think, about these meetings that we host and these events is that we're usually able to offer them bilingual because that represents our community. And we invite key stakeholders from the community to participate during these sessions. And I also wanted to share that during these listening sessions, we want to inform people in office or in public entities what our community is currently facing. And what's really great is that since we have these relationships built, we can frame the conversation that we're going to have. And so we really want to make sure that people's voices are going to be heard. And then one of the questions is like, how do you engage populations that you serve? And when we have these listening sessions, we connect with the community. So one of the things that we often talk about is building that trust and having that relationship already with the community. So then when we want to do advocacy, we can talk to community members to share more about, what their experience is, but you have to have that trust, and building that trust takes time. So when you have that trust, more often than not, I know that Liz has been doing the work, and I have been able to ask also community members to share their story. And even though it might be their first time, more often than not, people will say yes. And just in my own experience, I know that I have felt really nervous at first when it comes to advocacy, nervous to share my story. I've asked myself, like, why me? Why do I need to share, what I've been through? Or why is my voice important? And simply put, it's often that my voice is not being heard, my community's voice is not being invited to these conversations. And just in knowing that and, in showing up to those meetings and looking around and being like, no one looks like me here, or no one can relate to me. I know that it's important. And I ask for everyone to think about, what is it that you bring? What experiences can you share with others that maybe our representatives haven't heard before or could learn more about? And I know, like with my own story, some of these stories that we share in advocacy include trauma, they include difficult situations. So to have someone there along the way is very helpful. Liz is an expert in advocacy, and anytime, we're going to do advocacy, she'll do a prep meeting with me just to check in and just it's really like having someone hold my hand and say, like, remind me, Kati, your voice is important. And it really just is comforting and a reminder that my voice is important, and it's what really can make a difference. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Katie and Elizabeth. That was really great. Feel free, if you all have questions for Liz or Katie, to drop that in the chat. Otherwise, we will move on to our next panelist. And that is Barbara Schultheiss from Lopez Island Family Resource Center. Thank you, Barbara. Take it away.
Am I unmuted?
We can hear you.
Okay, good. I had a button that was saying unmute yourself on my screen. So I want to start by saying that we are a very small nonprofit that does not have any dedicated staff. So this is kind of a shared responsibility among a lot of us, basically. And I want to really echo what Katie and other people said. It's so much about building long-term relationships. And really our focus has been kind of meeting predominantly with our county and somewhat with state legislatures, and really building that relationships and getting to know them, sharing those personal stories, understanding what their passions are, what drives them, because I just find that such an important foundation to have that relationship there, and that it's not just one way, but it's really reciprocal. We're having that conversation and sharing. And then because we're kind of small, a big part of our focus is really about supporting community leaders and their ideas and getting behind them. And, we're doing that through a number of training and leadership opportunities that we have for both youth and adults, BIPOC, LGBTQIA, and disability rights leaders, but also contracting and hiring those individuals or groups and providing financial support for their work, because that's a way for us to build those stronger relationships with them, understand what's important to them, and really support them so that their voices are more powerful in kind of shaping our future. And we see kind of the power in what their successes when they're interacting with legislators. So, and then I this is sort of backtracking a little bit, but in those meetings also demonstrating the impact is a really important part of sharing those stories, because I do find that is what legislators are looking for. Like, they want to know more than just the concept. They want to hear the concrete stories or numbers or statistics, kind of really building both the data and the anecdotal stories together is, I think, what really sort of helps strengthen those relationships. And then collaborating with regional, state, and national partners. I think that's crucial for us because we're so small. I can't imagine without having the support of Tiffany and other organizations. And I have to confess that a lot of our collaboration comes from grant proposals that we get. So different funding sources in the state, they kind of band us all together. They're the ones that let us know about legislation so that we can sign on to letters. So that because honestly, we have very limited time. So for us as an organization, that's super, super helpful for people telling us that these bills are out there and, you know, you should get behind them and support them. We do a variety of things, from meeting with legislators to signing on to letter campaigns to getting our community members to write letters. So, because like we even just heard that most recently in San Juan County, they don't want to hear from nonprofit voices. They want to hear from community members and their constituents. So it's really important that we're always making sure that those community leaders are behind this and it's their ideas, but then also that we're having all those voices be heard by the things. And all I can say too, for some advice, is be persistent, because sometimes it takes a while to get meetings with people. And honestly, sometimes it takes calling, emailing, whatever, so that you can kind of get in the door and talking with people. But it's worth it just to keep persisting, because it's those relationships really pay off in the long term, and kind of keep cultivating that. And we had some successes, particularly here in San Juan County, that has really led to some new programs that have really brought in a lot more money to support like affordable housing and things like that. So I think that helps when people see the successes of all their efforts in these meetings as well.
Great. Thank you, Barbara. And you mentioned in previous conversations that you had brought some young people to engage in the legislative process. Could you share a little bit more about that story?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that was such an amazing day. It was actually done virtually, but again, this is because of a grant we have. So we're involved with Mentor Washington and youth mentor programs. So they invited us to have 2 of our Indigenous youth present before the Senate hearing to create the new statewide agency supporting youth engagement programs. And it was really amazing, because these youth spent a lot of time on their own preparing their testimony and then presented before the Senate. And I think the best part of all was at the end of it, they were so proud. It was like they were floating on a cloud. They were just so happy and energetic about the opportunity to kind of help influence these programs. So, and you know, we are doing a lot of work with La Cima youth as well, and we just see how energized they are about shaping the future and coming to the community with ideas and how to do things better, and see these big gaps and with their solutions on how to fill them. So that is the best part about this work, is seeing all that incredible energy and self-confidence and people speaking up for what's needed. And I mean, they're truly the leaders shaping the future.
That's so awesome. Thank you for sharing, Barbara. All right. Well, if Barbara is wrapped up, then we will move on to our next panelists from Homage Senior Services. And so we are going to hear from Michelle Frye and Julie Rose.
Thank you. Great material from everyone before me. I guess I just want to say that all of us that do it know that advocacy is a work in progress. And by the very nature of what we do at Homage, we advocate for older adults and those with disabilities, but we did feel like we needed to set up something where we're a little bit more formal about it. We started the last year doing workshops on ageism and trying to educate there, and then also how people can become their own best health advocate. And we worked with changing the narrative out of Colorado, so they were great to partner with. We also, when we first started, we were participating in candidate forums on our own, and then we joined forces with the League of Women Voters and then posted the results of those on our website. So our website is a good tool to help educate, and that's one thing we've tried to start with. So people, sorry, I got a little bit of a cold. I'm not nervous yet, but that's just kind of my voice is cutting out. Ways we can reach out to help educate is through our website and letting them know how to reach out to their elected officials. Excuse me, I'm gonna take it off. And that's really important. If people don't know who represents them, how can they get started, right? So I love that we have those links on our website. From the get-go, we have had advocacy committee meetings, and we do those quarterly at our agency, and both staff and board members have been invited to participate. We want to grow our connections with the community, but we wanted to better define our strategy before we start asking community members, because how do you determine who you ask and who you don't ask? So we have been trying to develop a strategy policy, and that will be, be going out in the next year. So our current plan is to start with coffee and chats with our elected officials, both local and state representatives, do a quarterly newsletter with them, and send out invitations for them to participate or volunteer at special events. Like in our agency, they love volunteering at our multicultural senior center, serving lunches and or doing ride-alongs with our Meals on Wheels program. We participate in community legislative activities. We were very fortunate this year to get to send staff to 2 large city ones in Snohomish County, and that was the city of Everett and the city of Linwood. They each had their own state of the city events, and that was great because they gave us the bigger picture of what they were forecasting for their year and where their focuses would be. Then we very important to us is to attend community invitations. And one of them was with our Economic Alliance of Snohomish County that did a legislative kickoff event. And we were able to attend that. And they focused on 4 representatives, and you really got to hear their platforms. I love that. And then you knew where they stood, and they were key players in the legislative representation, which was great because then you knew automatically what committees I sat on. And if you needed help in certain areas, then we could rely on them. For example, Marco Elias is on the transportation committee, and we have strong program in that, which Julie will speak to. So it was great to kind of put a name and a face and hear his platform. We also were able this year to send a staff member to the Nonprofit Association of Washington for their legislative reception. And that staff member came back with rave review. So great job to them. In February, we had our staff participate in Senior Lobby Week and asked them to reach out to their state elected officials about bills they were passionate about. And we've done some education on, we sent along with that to our staff. We did some education and told them what kind of bills were out there and what the focus was. Next slide, please. So we can't stress enough the value of partnerships and joining advocacy groups and getting on people's newsletters. Some of the ones we follow and participate with are listed there: the American Society on Aging, the Washington Low-Income Housing Alliance, Justice and Aging, the Washington State Senior Lobby, and their partners, the Nonprofit Association of Washington, PSARA, Puget Sound Advocates for Retirement Action, and the League of Women Voters of Snohomish County. I know it takes a lot of our time when we attend meetings and webinars, but they're so important. I think when you can attend, it helps identify trends, and that's important to know and share with your organization and your community. And just to participate in voter education and forums for elected offices. I would say the payoffs are that, we really have those strong connections to our elected officials and the benefits of that. We recently had a state representative reach out to us. He wanted to sponsor a bill about caregiving, and he wanted to turn to professionals who knew about that. So we were able to pull together a cross-county group that were able to meet with him and give some insight. And Julie, I don't know if I'm gonna get your introduction out. I'll try. My voice is really going. I would like to take this time to introduce a coworker, Julie Rose. She's the Director of Transportation, Home Repair, and Facilities at Homage. And she sits on our senior management team and is a very strong voice at our agency. And I'll turn that over to you, Julie.
Thanks, Michelle. I am unlike the professionals you've just heard with all this great education, advice, and ways to go about this. I wanted to share with all of you that a year ago, I was asked to be the director of our transportation program. I knew nothing about transportation. So when I started, what are the problems here? There were several messes we had to clean up. And number one, funding. The transportation program here at Homage provides rural transportation to people who are 55 and older and disabled or low income. So you can imagine taking an Uber all the way out to Index or Darrington is going to cost you hundreds of dollars compared to just running between Everett and Linwood, which are very close to each other. And so we needed to figure out how to get more money. So I'm just boots on the ground. I don't know anything about transportation. I don't know anything about advocacy. I'm thrown in. So first of all, we got to figure out where are the areas that we're delivering this service and who are the representatives that are in those areas. And very quickly, we stumbled upon Congresswoman Susan Del Bene, whose area represented a portion of a route that we knew was underserved. So at that time, it's an appropriations request for a community project funding. And we found it at the last minute. We only had about a week to put the entire application together. So how are we going to make this happen? She doesn't know us. We don't know her. You know, this whole thing. What do you do? Well, you just go for it. And that's what I'm going to tell you. Always follow their advice, but in the beginning, if you have to, just go for it. We went ahead and applied, and I'm part of a couple different transportation coalitions here in Snohomish County, and we were able to invite Susan Del Bene to come and sit with us during one of our meetings. And it was so great to just see her listening. She, nodded a lot. There's probably a lot of things she's heard before or things that are already in the works. But when one of my coworkers said, do you realize that the state and county funding that we have does not allow us to cross a county border? She looked up, asked more questions, started feverishly taking notes. So, we've got our name in front of her. We've got our new problem that she's never heard of in front of her, and she's interested. And so it was an opportunity, as everyone's saying, to begin a relationship, starting with something as simple as, excuse me, a thank you note after that meeting was over. Thank you for taking time to listen to us. Excuse me. And so that was pretty important. So again, reaching out to her throughout this process. In the end, about 9 months later, we found out that we were awarded $250,000 to provide a bus and the operations for an area out between Index, Gold Bar, and Snohomish. And we're very excited about that. So even when you know nothing, go for it. We also started looking at other areas. Where else are we wanting to serve? Where else is there funding available and that would match up with what we want to do? So what you want to do is you want to meet with either the representative themselves or one of their assistants. As somebody said here in the chat, they're just as important, if not more than the actual representative. Invite them out to your location, talk to them about what you do, what you bring to your community, and also find out what their focus is. And so we were able to kind of really dial in with Patty Murray's assistant, and Ann Larson came out to our organization. And we just kind of, questioned her on what's the big focus in this next year. And she was able to share those with us. So what we were asking for could be tailored to make the most sense. So toot your own horn. They need to know what you do and how well you do it here in the community so that you now have a relationship. When they hear your name, they go, hey, these guys do good work. What do they need? Okay, let's make sure we get that for them. Absolutely invite them for a tour at the agency. That's always really interesting. I know their time is very, very limited. Even our own mayor here in the city of Linwood, we're just 3 blocks away. We moved in 3 years earlier and she'd never been out to our facility. She didn't know what we did. And so even just reaching out really locally, start there. It matters because now she's looking at giving us about $100,000 in funding. So look ahead. The relationship, I think, is the best. Educate, educate, educate. And when they really know what you do, you might get lucky. So I wish you all the very best. I am not an advocate because it's out of my wheelhouse. I am so impressed with all that each of you give and do for this community every day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Julie, I would say you are an advocate. You are doing the work. You are doing an amazing job. So thank you to both you and Michelle. And so, yeah, this is great. All right. Well, at this point, I think we'll have time for just a few questions for all of our panelists together before we jump into our breakout rooms. And let's see, I want to make sure we get everybody up here. Thanks, Natalie. The first question I would like to ask, and feel free, audience members, if you want to chime in the Q&A section or in the chat, please do so, and we will answer your questions. So first question is, how do you know when your advocacy work is effective? How do you know when it's working? What does that mean to you? And just go ahead and jump in if you have an idea.
I'll jump in. Liz from Community Action of Skagit here. And obviously there's the policy and budget wins, but what that looks like in people's lives, that's really when we know that we've been effective. So for example, last year we were able to get $250,000 in a budget proviso for the state to match some federal funding for all 30 community action agencies around the state. And that, or actually it was multi-million dollars, but we got $250,000 of that funding in Skagit County. So we were able to increase access for rural folks at our East County Resource Center. We were able to hire a Mixteco speaking staffer in our WIC program and expand access to things like diapers and formula. And as Katie was describing, we use some of that funding to support our Latinx Advisory Committee so more people can speak up. So I think we have to measure the change in people's lives, not just policy and budget wins, but then there's also the success of the relationships when those lawmakers come back and ask us, hey, we'd like to hear about this, as Barbara was describing.
Awesome. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Oh, this is something that you probably should be in on. It's North Sound.
I can't see who's talking. Can you share your name? All right, sorry about that. If you have a question, sorry, feel free to just try again or put it in the chat. Sorry about that. It looks like we have a comment or a question in the chat from Catherine. Something I don't know much about, but would be curious in is advocacy as community and individual healing. Yeah, and Barbara, you spoke a little bit about seeing that energy shift in the young people. I wonder if others or Barbara have thoughts on that.
I would just say, yes, it is healing and also empowering for people to know that they're affecting the change that's needed in their community.
Absolutely.
And it's a kind of another outcome, like Elizabeth was saying, is seeing people just feel confident and empowered to speak up. I mean, that's huge.
Absolutely. All right, as we wrap up our panel and start moving to our breakout groups, just wanted to say thank you to all of you so much for joining us and for sharing your wisdom and experience. And if you have anything else you want to add right now, any kind of parting words to the audience, feel free to share it now. But you've already shared so many great ideas. And so I hope this was helpful for everybody in the audience. And I just really appreciate your time. So thank you so much. All right. So we are going to start moving to breakout rooms. So before we do that, I'll just kind of share a little bit about the goals for this. So we have heard so many great stories and words of advice from our panelists and our experts. And now we want an opportunity for you all to kind of reflect and digest what we've heard and think about what this can look like in action for you within your organization and also for us as a network. And so we're going to move into groups of about 4 to 5 for 15 minutes. And what we'd like you to do is go ahead and introduce yourselves in your group, and briefly share what you or your organization are doing already related to advocacy, and then talk about what you would like to be doing or what you would like to learn more about. And then feel free to also share what types of advocacy activities we could engage in collectively as a network. That would be really great if you could start exploring that idea. And yeah, then we will come back together in a larger group to share what folks discussed and talk about next steps. So Natalie will start working her magic and splitting us into groups. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Rooms are going to open now. So if you have a little bit of a lag, that's you moving into the room. See everyone soon, and I'll be giving updates along the way to keep an eye on time.
Thanks, Natalie. All right, here we go. Awesome. All right, well, as everybody trickles back in, I hope you had some great conversations in your small groups. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tiffany to help us talk about what you all discussed. Thanks, Tiffany.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we had a really great conversation in our breakout, and I hope you all did too. I'm curious just kind of where folks went and what your group discussed. Feel free to pop off mute and just share a little bit about the conversation. Sarah.
Thank you. I'll lower my hand. Yeah, our group was talking about the ability of members of the network to do their jobs well and to support their employees and to support the causes and empowerment, and how we really, at the top of advocacy is something very soft and maybe hard to hold, and that is cultural shift around values and how we are elevating the value of caring for one another, and through that funding and compensation and so forth. So that was something that we kind of went around and around on, the importance of, I use the example of NAMI here in Whatcom County. I know they're always struggling for money. They're always fighting to get the money to stay alive. And just imagine the work that they could do if they weren't struggling to stay alive, if they could, work at peer programs for youth who are living in very difficult times. So, it is the cultural shift. Where do we put our values and our money, and how do we build that culture across the board?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. That's really helpful. I think we talked a little bit about that too, that there are kind of ideas about what should be funded and what shouldn't be funded, and how we care for one another. And if we kind of help folks, that a lot of our things that we do and get funded is to help folks survive, instead of really shift the system, right? Which takes the culture shift. Yeah. Who else?
Can we just come off of mute? Is that okay?
Please. Thank you, Devin.
Our group talked a little bit about our community's histories with policy and the legal system, and the interplay between the two, and how some of the work for civic engagement doesn't start at the level of you need to vote or getting people to come share their stories, but some healing work that needs to happen, and some very honest conversations about how policies have been used to weaponize and target the same groups that we are working to elevate. And so it's just a strange juxtaposition to, I liken it to colonialism in West Africa and missionary work. You know what I mean? It's like you make a mess and then want to go be the hero and wonder why you're not so well received. So anyway, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Devin. That's a great point. Yeah, and I think it is hard. Because I feel like in my career, something I've really enjoyed is like helping folks feel like they belong in Olympia, or like their lawmakers truly work for them. But it's also an invitation to participate in a system that doesn't support them, right? And folks who have really like antiquated ideas about antiquated racist ideas about who gets served, who gets money, who gets funding. What else did folks talk about?
Hi, I'm Heather from, I live on Orcas Island, and I work for a coalition to end homelessness on Orcas. And I shared about a recent, there's an effort that many organizations, nonprofits, Barbara's included, on Lopez, have been trying to basically get a 1/10 of 10% sales tax. So it's a county thing that we've been working towards. And I shared what I thought was so interesting, and I'm really new to this work, is that what I found to be most supportive and most exciting is hearing from other organizations what they're passionate about, what they're excited about, and what their needs are. And as opposed to coming from a standpoint of, being worried about trying to get everybody's needs met or whatever the personalities are, I've just been so encouraged at how people are so willing to sort of work together to further something and be hopeful and energetic and realistic and share their information. And I just have found that openness to what people are bringing, even if it might, sometimes I find that it's like, oh, that's making things more complicated. But the reality is, it's actually making it more exciting and passionate, and it's really important. So, Liz was so kind in sharing her long-term wisdom about the ebb and the flow and the rolling movement and the different aspects to this work that require sort of faith and patience, and sometimes, sometimes a full-on press. There were a lot of sports analogies and they were really good. I was like, that kind of helped me sort of keep things in context. So I just want to say thank you for this great, this great gathering. And I just feel really blessed to have met so many people and listened to people that are learning on the way and just jumping in. So thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. Yeah, nonprofit folks are some of the most passionate, innovative, creative, sometimes scrappy folks. And I think when you get us all together, we can move mountains. So I get really excited about that. Raymond, I think I saw you come off mute. Did you want to share?
Well, I was going to share, but I also wanted to show that I'm Raymond Miller. I'm the president of Vets Place Northwest Welcome Home. One thing I want to say is today is National Vietnam Veterans Day. So if you know a Vietnam veteran, say hello to them. And one of the things that we talked about that we're working on is mental health issues and mental health compensation, access to those, and suicide. We lose about 21 veterans a day to suicide. And the effort that we're working on to help combat that, as well as we help the veterans and make that sometimes difficult transition from military back to civilian life. And the ways we do that and how we get funding. I'm not a 501c3 organization, so we're so we don't we get donors and people to help it, and a lot of veterans who we have helped along the way, they help other veterans. So, but we want to make sure that we advocate for veterans, and that's what we wanted to talk about. and the ways, and we do it on the national, local, and state level, and we pretty much know everybody in the state. Our state, everybody know who we are. A couple of weeks ago, we had a wonderful opportunity to talk to the White House Veterans Affairs and Veterans and Families, Military Families Coalition out of the White House, and they took 3 questions, and one of them was from us. So we thought that was nice to have the White and get a shout out from the White House on what we're doing, and so that kind of helps along with funding opportunities and make sure that we we give back to the community as much as we possibly can. But yes, advocating for veterans is what we do. And when you advocate, and veterans and their families, when you just don't, veterans don't just come with veterans, they have, families, husband, wives, sons, daughter, mother, father, sisters, brother. You got to take the whole, it's just not the veteran that you're working with, you're working with the veterans and their families. So that's it.
Yeah, thank you, Raymond, for that work. And it's really exciting to hear stuff happening on the national level too. I think sometimes that feels really far away, but yeah, is also super important. Mario.
Yeah, hi, thank you. In our group, we talked about a lot of different things, and we're very excited to learn from each other and go on this path of learning together. We at Empire Next Nations, we are, we're fairly a new organization to almost 3 years in. And so we're learning about advocacy ourselves. We don't have a particular plan, but we do work with other organizations like the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network. We were in Olympia last month and were able to talk about our issues. And also I think that we currently, everywhere we go, we hold space for what we believe and what we see in our community, talking to decision makers, program managers, coordinators, anyone about how to advocate for things that they might be doing or thinking about doing that might affect the people that we work with, that they might not naturally see. So things like excluding non-English speakers, or folks without digital literacy, or in rural settings, or without a specific number that will identify them as eligible for benefits, or how a definition of, say, Indigenous does not include Indigenous language speakers from other countries like Mixteco, Nahuatl, Zapoteco, et cetera, and that excluding funding for many organizations. And in terms of how North Sound could participate, one of the things that I was thinking is to perhaps North Sound can conduct surveys of what are our priorities as different organizations, and perhaps bringing us together around those priorities, and perhaps doing a campaign to go up to Olympia one day and talk about our combined priorities. We can create online digital education tools through North Sound about all those things combined. And one thing that I would like to bring forward is getting together an Amazon 1% tax to help state nonprofits, because I think that some organizations that make tons of money should at least provide some funding to help out, not just for what they are doing in their programs, but really to help the state in general. The solutions are in the community and in the people. And then also to allow for actual nonprofit tax exemption in the state, rather than being taxed as another organization, because it's not fair to be taxed and doing the work and having those funds go back to being taxed over and over. So anyway, those are some things. Thank you.
Yeah, I love hearing about some of those, systemic issues, right? I think changing the way that we do taxes and funding could be really revolutionary. And there's some cool stuff going on around that. Barbara, I see you unmute. Did you have a response?
Well, it was just the same thing. I wanted to say that what Devin said, and I know Cassandra eloquently said in our group, is our current funding and systems are built on broken, oppressive systems, and that needs to change. And I think sometimes even we say we're going to like, I agree that the funding situation is complex, but it's still built on a system that doesn't really trust communities and grassroots leaders to know what they need and give them the money for them to do what they want. It's like there's a basic inherent distrust that needs to change, and that would be the greatest power of all of us coming together to advocate for that kind of change.
Yeah, thank you so much, Barbara. Some of the work that we're trying to do at the Nonprofit Association of Washington is work on nonprofit government contracts between nonprofits and government. And that's a lot of what we're finding, right? Smaller nonprofits, rural nonprofits, and POC-led nonprofits get less funding and usually have more restrictions. And yeah, there's a lot of paternalism in the way that our contracts are written.
And I find even like best practice, like so many grant funding goes towards certain best practices that definitely are not, they don't support people of color and things like that. They're just, it's like outdated research and so there's so much shame.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, some of those larger issues, not what is attempted to work on. And I kind of hear the idea of having North Sound ACH be a kind of a convener, maybe creating a shared advocacy agenda, and being able to do some education and action together. That would be really cool. I don't know if the capacity exists for that, but that would be really cool. And I think we're running out of time, so I'll pass it over for just, the final thoughts and closings.
Awesome. Thank you, Tiffany. And thank you everyone for sharing out. And I will just wrap us up today. Today was wonderful. It was so great to hear from so many of you, to get a better understanding of how advocacy works at the legislative level, and to hear from some of you how you jumped into that work, even when you felt like you didn't know what you were doing, but realizing you had the skills and the tools that you need, and working together with folks in communities and other organizations and coalitions to make change. So really fantastic and really inspiring, and I'm excited about the work that's to come. So Mario, you mentioned a survey, and actually we do have a survey out right now. So a few of you have taken this so far. Would love if everybody on today's call could take it if you haven't already. And we'll keep it open for another week or so. But really this survey is intended to get kind of a baseline understanding of where we're at as a network in terms of understanding and capacity and experience with engaging in advocacy work. And it also asks about what policy areas are priorities for, or issues are important to your organization and also to your community that you serve. And it also asks a few different things. So this will be really helpful in kind of laying the foundation for us moving forward with setting up a list of policy priorities for the coming year and years. So definitely fill that out, and we will, then we'll talk about where we want to go from there. So appreciate all of you so much, and thank you for doing that. And we'll send out another reminder with the survey as well. All right, next slide. So there have been so many really cool resources shared today. We will make sure that those are all up on our resource library, and the link is there and will be shared in the chat. And we have a collection specifically on advocacy. You can also, if you type in the search bar advocacy, you will pop up a lot of these resources, and we'll continue to add to that. And there's also an option on the homepage of the resource library to suggest a resource. So if you come across something that you think would be really useful for other members of the network, definitely suggest it in there or email us directly, and we can get those on there. So yeah. Let's see. And then just a couple of quick updates before we wrap up. We are going to have another advocacy focused learning session coming up in May, and an invite will be coming soon, but save the date. It's going to be May 17th, and it's going to be focused on collaborating with young people and emerging leaders in community advocacy. So it's going to build off some of the work that we talked about today, and really excited about that. So more to come on that. And then Nika has a quick update as well. Nika, do you want to update? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to provide a quick update on the proposal process. I know some folks have been asking about that. So the project proposals that folks have been submitting through the Collaborative Action Network, wanted to let everybody know, really exciting. We've gotten our first 3 projects funded. One is focused on culturally appropriate mental health services for Latinx youth. Another is focused on expanding behavioral health integration services for LGBTQ, particularly trans youth in Skagit County. And then the third is looking at financial liberation for formerly incarcerated people. So really excited, and we'll get more information out about those as they get started. And we also, prior to the review committee getting set up, funded 2 projects. One was purchasing a tiny home in collaboration with a tribal partner that is going to be gifted to a homeless veteran and their family. And they are going to be able to use that when national leaders visit on site to leverage other funds for more tiny homes. And then the second one is was in collaboration with funders in Skagit County to provide $50,000 a year to 15 different BIPOC-led organizations for operating support. And we're hoping we can replicate that in other counties too. So we're working through those. I know we've got some of our review committee members on the call, so really, really appreciate those folks and the time and thought that they are putting into these, and we're working through them. So thanks for your patience, and excited to share more about them as we move along.
Thank you, Nika. And if folks have questions about that process, can they email you?
Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. My email is nika@northsoundach.org, NYKA.
Great, thank you very much. All right, well, that wraps up our session today. The only other ask we have of you is to take a quick post-session survey just to give us your feedback on how today went and how we can improve for future learning sessions. So that was dropped in the chat, and it will also be sent out via email. Just want to say thank you to everybody. I love these learning sessions. It's always so great to connect with so many of you and learn together. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and week, and hopefully it's sunny where you are. It's sunny where I am, so hopefully you get to enjoy some spring weather. So thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.